Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first breakout session of the conference. My name is Julie Esser, and I am Chief Experience Officer with CULedger. I'm excited to be here today. We have 30 minutes to spend with you to kind of give you a brief update. How many of you were at last year's Global Forum and heard me speak? Awesome. Some new faces in the audience, definitely. And what Chris Kearney and I are going to do a little tag team for you today and share with you what the credit union industry is doing as it relates to decentralized identity. How many in the room are familiar with credit unions? Awesome. Those that are not familiar with credit unions, we are non-for-profit financial cooperatives. They're called credit unions in the U.S. primarily, probably more financial cooperatives outside of the U.S. We are a global industry. We represent more than 26,000 credit unions across the globe and over 260 million consumers. This pilot in particular is very focused on US. We haven't really reached out globally to other credit unions across the group. We've got a lot of interest among credit unions that are interested in knowing what we're doing here in the US, and our plan is to expand outside of the US boundaries, but we're just focused on these pilots and these use cases here in the US. In terms of an agenda, it's pretty simple. I'm going to share a little bit about our learnings in implementing and deploying our decentralized identity credentials and some of our results. And then Chris, who is with TruWest Credit Union here in town, is going to share more personal results from his own experience with you all. And then we'll share 10 minutes of the time together for a Q&A. So just a little bit of background about CULedger for those of you that may not be familiar. We began in early 2016 as a simple research action project. There was a lot of talk, as you know, about blockchain and decentralized identity at that time, and a lot of talk about cryptocurrency also. And credit unions did not necessarily want to get into the cryptocurrency space, but they realized that there could be some financial and operational opportunity benefit from the using the technology just for operational purposes. And so we came up with our first working proof of concept, was really focused on back office implementation. We completed our Series A round of financing at the end of November last year. And also we went live with our decentralized identity at that time called MyCUID. And that's one of our learnings that I'll talk about later on in the presentation. So we had 3 credit unions that we worked with in developing pilots and use cases, and I'll talk specifically more about them in a few minutes. And that's what kind of got us here. Last year we spent a lot of time on focusing on deployments and pilots. This year our focus is on commercialization. We're open for business, we're ready to go. We're getting credit unions signed up on this and starting their implementations. As you all know, there are really 3 components of a transaction. You need to know who you're interacting with, you need to document that transaction, and you need to exchange some type of value. That's usually in the form of settlement, at least in the financial services space. So CULedger as an organization, we're not just decentralized identity, we're a network of peer-to-peer digital exchange. So we are focused on all 3 components of the transaction, not just decentralized identity, but we're calling trusted information and leveraging smart contracts for that. And then also in digital value, in particular settlement and cross-border payments. But our primary focus is right here, is in decentralized identities and decentralized credentials, because that's where it all starts, right? Every interaction a credit union has to start with identifying who they are, and that's where our focus is. So let's talk a little bit about our problem that we're trying to solve. So from a consumer standpoint, I think you all can probably relate to this, right? The frustration of having too many passwords, getting forced out of your accounts, having your data compromised. I mean, we've all been victims of something along this chart, any one of these bullets sometime in our lives, right? And the frustration we can sense from that guy is very relative to our story. On the credit union side, not only do we have to deal with that kind of frustration because we're dealing more in a digital age with members and consumers and interacting with financial data, but this is the credit union identification problem. So with a prospective member, so a consumer that wants to be a member of a credit union, they can apply for membership either in the branch, online, or through an indirect lending channel. Credit unions do a lot of indirect lending loans, and so that's a very important channel for them. In all three instances is a separate authentication process. Okay? Now, if we look at the existing member, once you become a member, you have access to your transactions either through the branch, contact center, or online. And again, all three of these different channels require its own authentication process. So it's a mess. It's no wonder we get confused and frustrated as a consumer, but we make it miserable for our members to do financial transactions. And we're not alone. Any bank, any other financial institution in this space probably has the same type of issue. So we can dig a little deeper in this too, in terms of the information that we gather. So if we break it down into new members, what information are we collecting? What are we doing from a credit union standpoint to verify that member information? And you can see a lot of inconsistencies here in this chart, right? There is some old technology being used. There's a lot of manual process involved in this. On the new member side or the existing member side, that authentication can vary based on the type of transaction that you perform with the credit union, if they consider you high risk or not. The online methods, the online username and password and out-of-band codes, they don't work. We all know that. But we're forced to use them because nothing good has come to the surface until now. And so that's why we've introduced Member Pass. And you saw in the earlier slides that we first introduced our decentralized credential as MyCUID. We have rebranded MyCUID to what is now known as Member Pass. And quite simply, the value prop of Member Pass is the simplest and most secure way for credit unions to verify their members, regardless of channel, period. And of course, those of you that are very familiar with Hyperledger Indy and that initiative, you know the benefits of this project, right? Is allowing consumers to have ownership and control of their personally identifiable information. And what better way of doing that is with the credit unions. Credit unions have historically had a high value of trust and satisfaction among consumers. And so it's only a natural fit for credit unions to be issuing these type of credentials to their members. These are the use cases that we're deploying right now. In call center authentication in particular, simply because we've seen a higher degree of fraud in these channels. A lot of social engineering is going on. Account takeovers in this channel is going on. Predators are taking advantage of frontline staff to do harm. That's what it boils down to. Mobile authentication. So we have a credit union that has their own mobile banking application. They don't use a third party for that. And we're able to easily integrate into the back end of that mobile banking application. So it's completely seamless for the member. They don't even know that there's a Member Pass credential exchange happening on the back end. Voice banking is another interesting opportunity. So how many of you guys have Alexas? I know the number of smart devices that I have in my house keeps growing and growing and growing. And they're great tools, they're great utilities. However, from a financial standpoint, there's a lot of limitations. Without any type of authentication method, there's only certain things that you can do on those devices. You can only check balances and things like that. You can't transfer funds or pay bills or anything like that without a higher degree of authentication. So this voice banking application use case is kind of fun and interesting. And we've embedded MyCUID or Member Pass into the front end of that process as an authentication method to allow consumers not to have to worry about vocalizing usernames and passwords, but they can use their Member Pass credentials just to authenticate and get access to those funds. And then we have some other use cases that we're exploring. We're exploring a shared KYC component. Most of our focus has been on existing membership and existing back office operations. But we're finding that there is a huge opportunity for new member onboarding and leveraging the KYC compliance requirements that credit unions have and streamlining that for them. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. But it's not only just KYC. It's also know your supplier. It's also KYM. That's the latest acronym that I've heard. Do you know what KYM is? Know your machine. So when you're talking about autonomous lending, autonomous vehicles, autonomous, Lexus devices, that is the new buzzword of KYM, know your machine. From our pilot experiences, last year we were very focused on these deployments. The technology itself was proven. We needed some user acceptance to help us in this journey. And we had 3 credit unions step up to the plate and help us in our pilots in defining what these use cases are. And we do have live credentials, live production credentials. Most of them have deployed in their employee base because most employees are also members of the credit union as well. There are a lot of different learnings. We made a lot of changes into the user experience with the tool, and we used the Connect.me digital wallet that's provided by Evernym to facilitate the MemberPass credential. And I'll get into a little bit some of these learnings next into a little bit more detail. But overall, from a key learning and awareness standpoint, we know that the industry is ripe for this. We know that identity, cross-border payments, KYC are tremendous valuable use cases. Interesting to note is 4 years ago, our conversation centered a lot around the use of blockchain technology. Now, I would say that our conversations are probably 10% of that conversation. Before when you heard about blockchain, people were afraid to talk about it. There was a lot of unknowns. But I think things have kind of simmered down a little bit and realized this technology is not any different than what I'm using today. I really don't have to know the details and the specifics of how it works. I just know it works. I know that this can be trusted and it can be proven as a really great tool. From a member standpoint, we got a lot of great feedback in terms of member experience, better security. A lot of that really resonated with them. And this is where the rebranding came in, and that came from our consumer testing as well. So in the credit union space, if you're familiar with credit unions, we are known heavily for acronyms, the use of acronyms. So MyCUID was intended to be my CU would be credit union ID, identification. On the consumer end, they really don't care. And they didn't have the appreciation that we do in the industry for those type of acronyms. And so oftentimes it was called MyCUID. And so we knew that was just disastrous. So we had to do something different. And that's what resulted in the rebranding of MemberPass. And quite honestly, that was probably the best move we could have ever made in this journey so far, is changing the name of that product. There's still affiliation with credit unions because member refers to credit union members as consumers, but you can be a member of anything. You can be a member of a network. You can be a member of a lot of different things. And then the use of pass, we want to incorporate some analogy like the use of a passport. You use your passport for a lot of different ways to authenticate, and so that's why we incorporate MemberPass together. And Chris is going to get into a lot of his learnings, but from a CULedger standpoint, mass adoption has been slow. There's no hiding that. There are a lot of different dynamics in the credit union space. We are heavily reliant on third-party organizations to provide services to our members. That also results in the need to integrate. And so, that has caused some slowdown for us. The enrollment and authentication process really seemed to be complicated and confusing. Again, we've made a lot of strides in the user acceptance and we made a lot of adjustments to that. Chris will share with you some screenshots of the user interface that his members see. We changed our pricing model. We were in the gates with a more transaction-based pricing model. We went to more of an enterprise-wide pricing model, simply because credit unions want to deploy this across all of their members, not just a certain segment, which is great to hear for us. But we needed to make it affordable for them to do that too. I mentioned already something about the integration process, and also in the identification of new account acquisition or onboarding is a huge opportunity for credit unions as well. And this is why, if you remember that chart at the very beginning that showed the different channels that you can use to become a new member and the different processes that credit unions had for each one of those channels, this is how we can streamline this. This is pretty early in the conceptualization of our own shared KYC process, but you can see what we're thinking about in terms of how we can help streamline that for the credit union and take a lot of that manual process costs out of the equation for them. This is exciting stuff. All right, I'm going to ask Chris to come on board now and share a little bit about his journey. Oops, better take this along.
Sure, mine's on. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes? All right. My brother would be proud. He does AV work for a living. I successfully turned on the mic. It's nice to see all of you this morning, and thank you for having me in your forum. I'm looking around the room, and just by a show of hands, how many technologists, engineers, developers? Okay, about half. And then how about management folks like me? Other half? Okay, the sport coats give it away, I think, in most cases, or at least they do in our shop. Want to share a little bit about how we're applying distributed ledger technology in the credit union space, but really get into what is the problem we're trying to solve and what have we learned in this early stage adoption. I've been in the credit union space for 16 years. And I would say for the majority of that, I would describe the credit unions I worked for as mainstream adopters of technology, maybe even trailing adopters. Credit unions by nature are very conservative institutions. And one of the most exciting things about participating in CULedger and the MemberPass pilot is to watch credit unions step forward into a more aggressive place, right? And we are smaller institutions. So just a little bit about TruWest. We are a $1.2 billion institution, credit union, that was founded by Motorola employees in 1952. So we've grown to over 90,000 members. But if you think about that in terms of Wells Fargo or B of A or Chase, right, we're a small regional institution, right? There are 20 folks that do technology work inside of TruWest. We have 260 employees overall, many of them focused on serving our members. So for us to step out and say, hey, let's attack distributed ledger technology and think about how that might make life better for our members and employees, that's a really big thing and something I'm very excited about. But at the end of the day, if you don't do business with a credit union, just think of the relationship you have with your bank. Right? Everything you do today, from your mobile app to depositing checks to visiting the ATM to getting a home mortgage or perhaps wealth management services, those are all things that we do today. So what's our problem and what are we attacking here? First of all, this bad guy is after your money. Not really after my money, right? After your money. Your money's on deposit with the credit union. And the fraud has shifted in recent years towards the phone channel. Frankly, our firewalls, our mobile security, and our technology has drastically improved. It's harder and harder to compromise your accounts electronically in our world today. But it's relatively easy to take an 18 or 20-year-old teller or an 18 or 20-year-old contact center rep and convince them to give the bad guy access to your money. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve. And credit unions are bold. They contact the credit union frequently. They have access to more information than they ever have through identity theft and you are ultimately the target. So we're working to protect you through this initiative. We wanted to start small in something that's a tangible problem, and we have high risk, high value transactions in the credit union that we need to protect. Our members may have started with Motorola early in their career here in the Valley, but now they might live in any one of our 50 states or around the world. So branches are only in Arizona or Texas. So if you want to do business with the credit union, often that's going to happen over the phone if it's a complicated transaction like a wire. And you can see the values of these transactions are quite substantial, right, with an average of $58,000. And if you're familiar with how money moves within institutions and between institutions, once money is wired, it's gone, right? There's really very little recourse between institutions, so it's critical that we get that transaction right. Currently, that process is very painful. We may ask you to go and perform an out-of-band financial transaction via an ATM or debit or even something we call shared branching, where you can go to another credit union, and then we'll ask you for information about that transaction to verify it in your accounts. So high friction in this process today. So our objectives are to reduce that fraud. We want to cut down the authentication time in the contact center. We spend a minimum of 90 seconds talking with members to verify their identity. So let's get into the technology, right? Here's a little bit about what we deployed. We're using the Connect Me app and we've applied credit union branding on top of that. So it's a white label implementation of Member Pass. And this is what you would see as a contact center rep. The first step in the process would be to get a member onboarded into the system and then to perform authentication. So we just put together a little widget within our intranet app that our contact center agents use, and it's just really simple. We want to put in some basic member information, authenticate. That authentication message then is going to communicate with APIs to MemberPass, and the member receives a message on their phone, which you'll see in a moment. And upon accepting that, there's then verification that's displayed back to the contact center agent. Again, 18, 20-year-old contact center agents, we want to make this super simple. Red check mark means they're good, right? Red X means not so good. Ask more questions. But thank you for the laugh in the audience. And I do, for the record, I do have a 17-year-old high school senior, so I think I can speak with authority on how we need to boil this down. So on the user side, once they have the app installed, they're going to get a pop-up alert, a message saying that TruWest wants to access your credential, and then you've got control. You can see here, you can accept that or reject that on the member side. So, in deploying this, it was the bulk of the work was accomplished in a 6-week pilot. We were able to deploy the platform very quickly. The only thing that we built internally was the user interface for the contact center app, and then we built the integration between our credit union data and the MemberPass solution. We deployed those 3 environments you can see here, created training materials and educated our team. We had a pool of 28 employee members that we put through that process with multiple transactions to gain their feedback, and then conducted a survey with their feedback. And you can see here, 70% told us the solution was easy to use, and 83% said they would adopt as a member. So the feedback was pretty strong that there's a need and a support for that. But with any pilot, right, one of the main objectives is to learn and find out what we can improve and what we can grow. Ultimately, we want to deploy this to 90,000 members, right? So it's got to be extremely seamless and rock solid. So some things about the pilot, both on the good and constructive side. having a defined and specific use case gives us a clear problem to solve. So, in a room like this where we've got leadership and management, architects, engineers, developers, right? When we've got a clear use case, we're all on the same page, right? We know what problem we're trying to solve. And when you talk about an average wire transaction of $58,000 and making sure that when that money moves, it's going to the right place, everyone's on the same page. So that was a key learning. The second is that the training is essential. We have to have everybody on the same page with respect to how the solution works and when we're using it. One of the confusing points for our contact center agents is they were kind of switching back and forth. Credit union folks wear a lot of hats, so one person might call and be authenticating with MemberPass, and another person might call and have a traditional voice authentication process. So making a consistent experience is really important. On the technology side, we subscribe to agile methodology practices, and we love this concept of a minimal viable product, right? In the credit union space, again, conservative institutions, we want to invest in sure things, right, that are going to work rock solid the first time. And this is a space where we said, okay, let's just get the basics in place, and let's get that out into production. Let's get in front of users, get feedback, and then work to improve that. So I would encourage you to consider that going forward in your implementations. And then just another thought here that is perhaps transferable to your world. We have what's called a core processor in the credit union space. The core processor is like the heart and lungs of the technology infrastructure. It processes all of your financial transactions and is a system of record for all of your member data. And our approach in the past has been you have to integrate with the core processor. And if you work in manufacturing and have a supply chain system, or you have SAP, or you have a CRM system in a service-based business, you all have these critical systems that house large amounts of data for your organization. And they're typically difficult to integrate with. I would encourage you to consider that there's alternate ways to integrate these products and get them up and running. We found it much easier to integrate with our data warehouse that had up-to-date data on a nightly basis. That's a much more open system to communicate with than a proprietary transaction processor. So just a little bit about architecture and getting these solutions up and running. Take maybe the sufficient road and not the more complicated road. And lastly, community is so important. Don't go it alone. You saw here today there's 3 credit unions that participated in this pilot. Julie and the team at CULedger have done an awesome job to keep everyone connected on calls. Credit unions are typically very cooperative. We're not always in direct competition with one another, but I'd look for opportunities within your industry and others that are doing like work to share information and learnings. That was so valuable to us. And then, just as we look a little more specific at the solution, we've got some work to do, and Julie highlighted some of that in the presentation. The process just has to be simple, right? And that's applicable to all of our industries. Companies like Netflix and Amazon have set the bar, right? And we all have to meet that in terms of ease of user experience. Decentralized credentials. This is a forward-looking feature that we're finding members are starting to ask us about. So with privacy legislation like GDPR in Europe, or now California's new rules, we see legislation popping up in Texas and Illinois, where there's going to be an expectation that we can relinquish a customer or member's information upon their request. And today, that's very, very complicated. But looking forward, this is an authentication solution where the credential is in the hands of the consumer. So that is critical, and we see has a lot of value going forward. So adoption, critical mass is necessary, particularly around efficiencies. When you talk about shaving time off call center transactions, you need to be able to do that with every single call, right, to build up that efficiency over time. And today, Today, I look at our 90,000 members at the credit union, and over 50,000 of them are active mobile users of our app today. But that didn't happen in 1 year or 1 month. That's happened over a decade. So finding a way to achieve critical mass at a much faster pace is something that we want to accomplish with the solution. And then one way to accomplish that would be to create a bridge between our current mobile app and the Member Pass solution. And that's currently where we are today, as we're exploring that opportunity. So, in summary, our friend's not going away, right? Fraud has always been a challenge in the financial services industry, and it gets more complicated every year. So, we've got to deal with this. Trust, while credit unions have done an exceptional job of building trust with their members, we have to work hard to maintain it. And it's a two-way conversation. We focus so much internally on, when Julie calls, is it Julie, right? And can we have that interaction and verify her identity? But quite frankly, in a world where we're getting spam phone calls, you want to know as a consumer, is it really the credit union, right? So this platform gives us an opportunity to have a two-way conversation to validate that trust. I mentioned a little bit about privacy legislation. Just another aside, this really happened just before the holidays. We had a member reach out to us at the credit union, and for a few reasons, they decided they did not want to be a member of the credit union anymore. And they said, we want you to delete all of our data. Could you think about that in your business? A customer walks up and says, I need you to validate that you've deleted all of my data within your organization. As a technology guy, that's a little scary to think about. But a solution like Member Pass gives you that ability with authentication from day one, because the credentials are in the end user's hands. They're in the consumer's hands. So this I think, on the horizon is going to be very important. And lastly, technology just has to play a role in the solution. Credit unions tend to be smaller institutions. They can still do a lot of things by hand, but that's not efficient. It doesn't scale, right? So technology helps us accomplish that. So we're at 11:32. So I think at this point, Julie and I would love to field your questions and see what we could help you with.
Yes.
What specifically made it possible to roll that out in an enterprise fashion?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
What made it possible to roll that out in an enterprise fashion?
Well, our first model that we had was very transaction-based. And so Chris mentions about the conservative nature of credit unions. And so there was a need to be able to feel comfortable of budgeting. So oftentimes transaction-based pricing is a deterrent, because you don't have control of costs. And man, I don't know if I want to promote this, because then my costs are going to go up and I didn't budget for it. And so having an enterprise, more subscription-based model alleviated that issue. So there's a set dollar amount that a credit union can budget for. They don't have to worry about usage. It's all included. As an organization, because we are owned by credit unions, we are profit motivated, but we're not profit driven. So that's different. So our cost structure has to be balanced with being able to have some quick adoption, and pricing can't be a deterrent. Yes, sir.
So how do you measure the success of this solution from a value standpoint? So what are the financial metrics that you're using, ROI, and what are the intangible metrics or benefits that you're using to evaluate the success of this project?
Great question.
Sure.
You want to go first?
I'll take just two angles, right? First is call center talk time, right? And has anyone called their bank recently? No? All right. Technology folks, right? You try to do it as little as possible. If you have, I think you would be surprised at the number of questions that you're being asked before you can even discuss something as a current balance. I got a nod in the back of the room. And we have a contact center of roughly 30 professionals, right? So you start multiplying out, shaving 30 seconds or 60 seconds off a call over all the calls you take that day, over all your agents and the cost of those agents. And it starts to add up pretty quickly, right? And we're just a small shop. So that's predominantly what we're looking at in terms of saving cost in the organization. And then intangibly, the other side of that is maintaining that trust with our members, right? Because, you know, folks, especially after an identity theft incident, they call us and they're really concerned, right? And they want to know what we can do. And we have the standard list of responses, such as, you know, freezing your credit or, you know, taking other steps. But this is a way to say, okay, we're taking your privacy seriously, we're taking security seriously, and here's a way for us to interact going forward.
Thanks your question. Yes, sir.
Thanks. You make it clear that you're focused on the digital identity, the credentialing aspects of it, not necessarily the transaction audit. You made it clear that for that digital and the credentialing, you know, Indy is the way to go, and I think it's clear that that's, you know, where industry's going, and then Aries is following. What are you doing, if anything, in that transaction audit space where you haven't touched that?
We really haven't touched it that closely. We've made a couple of announcements of exploring announcements with different organizations. One around loan participations in particular. That is a huge opportunity for credit unions because of their collaborative nature to be able to share or buy, sell loans from each other is important. But what goes with that is some level of due diligence in that transaction, right? And so that is one area that we're going to focus on in particular. KYC, the shared KYC component, that's number one on our list. They'll have some auditing components to that as well, not only for the credit unions themselves, but also for the regulators that we work with. The cross-border payments component of the value side, that's another big I won't call it priority, but it's something of interest to us, a higher set of interest for us because of credit unions like military credit unions, for example, right? We have a number of military-based credit unions in the U.S. that have members overseas, and they're sending money back and forth. And things of that nature, but also in countries that are underserved and underdeveloped. That's another big area for us and credit unions from a philosophical standpoint pay attention to. Yes, sir.
Maybe a follow-up question. Did you run it on the original sovereign mainnet, or did you establish with the credit union is operating it on Indy? How did you go about just setting up the net for production?
We are offering through the sovereign mainnet. Yeah, that is our backbone. Yes, sir.
I'm a member of the credit union up in the Seattle area, and I've approached the people in the front lines there about are they going to be CULedger or RiverPass? What would be your recommendation for the next time I ask them at the branch? Like, when is this coming to me?
That's awesome. I'm glad you're doing that. Thank you. Actually, if you go to memberpass.com, there is a section on our website just for consumers. At the bottom of the page, we ask you for just an email and what credit union belong to. And so the purpose of that is to aggregate interest among consumers. We're doing some secondary research with a couple of credit union research organizations for some additional testing and benchmarking. But this information is helpful too. We've got a great response going for members. We don't capture a lot of detail, but we want to know a number of times that we get interest for a particular credit union so we can use that and go talk to them. Thank you for asking. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
You mentioned the sovereign mainnet. So what have the early discussions been around with the sovereign token this year and integration into what you guys have started?
Yeah, the question was around the sovereign token. I don't have a really good answer for you because our focus right now are on these deployments, and that's what we're focusing on now. We haven't even really thought about or strategized around the token at this point in time. Yes?
So when you showed the demo, Chris,
Oh.
screenshots, it looked to me like a normal two-factor authentication type of thing, just right here in the stone.
why this is better to use Indy as opposed to some other process.
So,
It's probably two levels,
Yeah.
right? Because, us as a consumer, credit union number, you don't care, right? There's
Right.
also, so there's that level, I think here's what you can get, and there's probably a technical level as well.
well, just one conversation we've been having inside the credit union is just the recognition that the dominant two-factor authentication method that we see in the industry today is SMS text, right? And I think as technologists, we all understand that there's a shelf life to that solution. So that's, when I talk with our board and our leadership team, that's usually the topic I bring up, is that SMS text is vulnerable to just a whole host of issues, right? And this provides us a more secure method, right? That's kind of number one. And then number two, from a consumer perspective, I always highlight that you're in control of the credential. So this isn't a case where the credit union's giving you something and then you're just like parroting back that number. This is a credential that you control on your phone, right? You can choose to enable it, disable it, and that's a key differentiator. You're welcome.